Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben, and today we are looking at this review copy I was sent of Troika, which is one of the more fascinating mini RPGs to come out in recent years. It's created by Daniel Sill and Jeremy Duncan, and it was released by the Milazonian Arts Council, which creates a lot of really great role-playing game stuff. Here's what our back cover looks like. And what's really interesting about Troika is that unlike a lot of old school games that have been coming out recently, this one is not based on the Dungeons & Dragons rule set. Rather, it's based on something called Fighting Fantasy, which is frankly something I had never heard of until I started reading Troika. So Fighting Fantasy is a series of essentially choose-your-own-adventure books that came out several decades ago. But rather than being a standard choose-your-own-adventure book, you actually had to roll up stats for your character before you started playing the adventure. And those stats, with some very simple dice rolls, would affect how the adventure turned out, which is a pretty interesting idea. And these books became popular enough that they actually released a role-playing game system based on them. But due to its origins in this choose-your-own-adventure-like system, the rules are very simple, very streamlined, which lends itself well to this type of game. Essentially, if you enjoy games like My Own Maze Rats or Into the Odd, then this thing could be right up your alley. It's not a strict recreation of any old game, but it takes the bones of an old game and makes something really fascinating and beautiful out of them. Starts off immediately with character creation. Now, this is a D6 only system, so that's the only die that you're going to use. And you only have a couple stats, really. You have your skill, which is a D3 plus 3, a stamina, which is like your hit points, and you have luck. That's basically your only stats. You have those three stats. Those are modified by getting specialized skills, but we'll look at that in just a second. So rather than having classes, this book has backgrounds, and it has 36 of them. And it gives you some good guidelines for creating more. And indeed, on Daniel Sell's Patreon, he is creating more, and they're wonderful because I back him, so I check those out as he releases them. So this is with 36 entries on this table. It's a little bit like in Maze Rats, how you roll 2d6, and that chooses one of the 36 entries. And all of them are not things that you would expect. So this is a great example of implied world building. For example, you could be a journeyman of the Guild of Sharp Corners. So you're an assassin in training, graduated from fighting dummies and branding practice clients, and now you have a license to do it for real. You haven't fully developed the idiosyncratic methods required of a master, but you are on the path. So you start off with black clothes of an apprentice, a garrote, curved sword, 3 vials of poison, crossbow, and you have a variety of assassin-like skills at a very low level. So you're like an incompetent assassin. You could be a gremlin catcher. You could be a lonesome king. You were a king, the ruler of all you surveyed, great conqueror, a lawbringer. Unfortunately, your house sped off into the pixie forest, or your court magician ensured you disappeared, or you led a sortie into the stars to put your stamp on them as well. Either way, you are now a lost and lonely king without a kingdom. No one has heard of you or your people. Most don't believe you and laugh, or worse. They do believe you and shrug at the vagaries of fate. You start off with a nice weapon, a crown, a tired horse, 3 etiquette, 3 weapon fighting, 3 ride, and 1 tracking. They're so wonderfully flavorful, and by putting a party together of these, weirdo characters, you're going to have something really special. How the skills work, by the way, is you have your base skill, which is fairly low. It starts at, let's read this one more time, 3D plus 3. So it can go as high as 6 or as low as 4. And then you add this skill level to them. So your etiquette would be, so in the case of the Lonesome King, you would have 3 etiquette plus your base skill. That would be his total etiquette. So these skills affect that. So you have your skills, and then you're rolling 2d6 and trying to roll that number or less. So it's a roll under system. You can be a parchment witch, a necromancer, a poorly made dwarf, a questing knight, a rhino man, sorcerer of the Academy of Doors, temple knight of Telek the Swordbringer, the Sublime Society of Beefsteaks, and so on. As I said, the rules are mostly a roll under system, except for when you're doing a competitive task against another character, in which you roll your 2d6 and add your skill in order to try and beat theirs. And that's basically how combat works as well. You have luck, which is like your saving throw basically. But every time you use your luck, you lose a point of luck. So you can only do it a limited number of times. Your stamina. The game seems fairly deadly. You do start with a lot of stamina, though looking at the rules, it's possible to deal quite a bit of damage. So I think death is really on the table here. It has a very interesting initiative system where it uses a bag of tokens, and you have a token representing the player characters, and you have a bunch of them representing the NPCs, and you shuffle it around and you pull out tokens to determine who goes next. So it gives it a real aura of randomness. You never quite know who's going to go next. And if you pull out an end of round token, then everything gets reset. So if it's possible to not be able to go in one round. The things are a lot more wild and unpredictable. He's also created a series of cards that are very similar to this. So it's an initiative system that's based on cards. And he's kickstarting that, and that looks really cool. Things you can do during your turn. Taking into account other concerns. How armor works. Armor is basically damage reduction. And here's a really neat way to do weapons. So all the weapons are D6, as I noted, but he makes them, he differentiates them by using a table. So for example, if you're rolling a sword, you roll your D6 for damage, and then you look on the table to see how much damage it does. This allows for some really interesting ways to make really make weapons feel different. Right? So swords start at 4 and go up through 10 with a pretty steady increase. But we have other weapons that start at 1, so start at much lower, but then go up to 10. So there's a much wider variety there. In other words, you can really tailor the feel of the weapon by using these tables. So it's kind of a neat idea. Encumbrance. Encumbrance is a simple item slot system where you simply have 12 slots and you can fill them up and that's it. And the order that you pack them in your slots also matters, because when you try and get them out, you need to try and roll the correct number. That's really cool. We have a spell system, and all the spells are, like the backgrounds, really flavorful and fresh, at least in the way that they're described. So this is one of my favorites, the Assassin's Dagger. Evocatively named, but actually quite mundane. The wizard whispers to an object, and that object then seeks out and vigorously and repeatedly bumps into the target. Obviously, if you whisper to a poison dagger, the results are one thing, while doing it to a letter is another. Travels any distance, always arrives eventually. That's really cool. Use it to assassinate someone, or you could use it for all sorts of unusual, out-of-the-box purposes that the game creator hasn't even thought of, but the players probably will. It's a great example of the spirit in which these rules were written. Quite a wide variety of spells, and it gives you just enough information to know how to run it without overdoing it with tons of details trying to cover every possible situation. This is a game that trusts the game master to know what to do and to make common sense calls. We have an oops table for when things go wrong. Your wizard's probably going to get quite mutated over time. How all the skills work, in case you didn't understand how they, or what some of them were, like second sight. Some of them are a little bit unusually phrased, secret signs. Some common items that you might use, and a short little book of enemies. There's not very many here, but really I think the goal here is to give you a sense of what different types of enemies would be like, how you would stat them out, so that you can create your own. I don't feel like this is intended to be a complete bestiary by any means. What I really like is how every monster has a random d6 table of its attitude when you encounter it. And this is different for every monster, which gives everything a unique feel. There we go. Here is our character sheet in the back. And that's it. Troika. Very fast, very simple, like a lot of these light OSR games that have been coming out recently. But it really sets itself apart with some really great artwork. I really like the way that Jeremy Duncan does the art. It makes it feel just weird enough and just like on the edge of your imagination, where you're trying to fit together how this world works and how all these strange backgrounds fit together. And those pictures are really inspiring for doing that. I really like that. I like how it gives you just enough information to really get you going on how you want this world to feel. So I really love this game. If someone was running this, I would absolutely play in it, and I would love to run it too if I could find a group that would do that. So I'll put links to it down in the description below. Strongly recommend Troika. It's definitely one of the freshest and funnest games that I've read in quite a long time. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe and to join me on Patreon if you would like to support me making videos like this one. Also leave a comment below if you know of any other short, light OSR games that are pushing the whole industry in a new direction, trying out new mechanics, and really having a fresh take on the hobby. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you guys later.